So I wanted to start with you, Daniel. We are at the cutting edge of digital music consumption here in Scandinavia with the streaming and everything. I just wonder if you could give us a quick overview of how things are looking in 2019 as far as trends and developments.
I think first of all, I think it's starting to look really good. I mean, I'm super excited on behalf of the music industry that the numbers are for record music. It's starting to look really good, and everything from the valuing of universal music to the fact that Spotify seems to be making surplus to money coming back into the record music sector, et cetera, et cetera. However, there are also some big issues that needs to be solved or dealt with. So I find it a little hard every now and then to kind of balance the enthusiasm on what's going on and also having a sober skepticism on some of the issues that needs to be dealt with. But all in all, I think it's starting to look good.
So you're kind of like plus 10 and minus 10. So you're kind of like at a 0 in terms of enthusiasm.
Yes. Or on a scale from 0 to 10, I'm a 5-er. I would say 5-er.
You said there's some big challenges. Are you referring first and foremost to user-centric issues, or?
No, not necessarily. I think that there's money coming back into the music sector, which is really good. And you have to look at it historically. It's really good, and it really means a lot. And it's very difficult to overestimate how important that is. But then you can talk about how that money is being distributed, and the user-centric model is just one of many reasons or speculations of why that money is being distributed in a way that some people consider unfairly or unsustainable, and so forth. So I think the work from now on is to try and figure out how to do this more sustainable for more stakeholders. I think that is the core issue, and that may be to discuss the business models, but it may also be other stuff such as marketing efforts to spread attention. Not solely on the top 10 acts. So yeah.
Vickie, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think I'm a little bit more enthusiastic than Daniel.
I'm super. I hope I
because you live in LA, man.
I live in LA. We have sun. We're very happy. We're very happy people. I'm really enthusiastic about the market because I feel like we worked for literally 15 years to come up with a business model that all of the labels would buy into, that would resonate with consumers. And we also had to have operating systems on mobile phones and application development and APIs and infrastructure and all of these things, this big stack to make a great music app. And it's really happening now. And there's a lot of money flowing. I feel like there are a lot of things that we can do to improve. I think the user-centric business model is one to look at, but I don't necessarily think that it's going to solve all the problems. And I think there are a lot of people that are saying, well, we think it's going to be more fair. Well, there are a lot of things that influence how royalties are divided, including the business model, but also how many streams does someone have? How wide is their collection? How far do they veer? Do they listen to the same music over and over? And I also think that the other big issue of why money isn't making its way to everyone equally is because of rights and infrastructure and metadata and the capabilities of some companies that are in this space that don't have the mechanisms to be able to really keep their metadata current, be able to process terabytes of data that come in on the reporting, and then be able to account against advances or other kinds of systems and get the money back out to the artists. So I think we have to look at both sides, both the front end and what's the offer to the consumer and what's the business model, as well as what I kind of call the sausage factory of the music industry, which is the rights and the rights infrastructure.
Yeah.
We do have them, and we also have I think on the same issue around rights is we do have the Music Modernization Act in the U.S. which passed, which I think is going to be a catalyst to be able to consolidate some of the problems on the publishing side.
Could you just briefly say what that is to listeners of this podcast?
Yes. So the Music Modernization Act passed unanimously in the U.S., which I think may be the only thing that has ever been passed unanimously in our government. But that passed in October, and it changes a few different things. One is under Section 115, which is on-demand streaming. We currently have a process where you have to clear every single publisher for every single song. And that is going away. It's going to blanket rights. There's also going to be a central collective that we don't currently have a collective over mechanical rights in the US. So all of that data is going to be consolidated under one organization yet to be named. And it also is a removal of statutory damages in the US, which is part of what Spotify got caught up in. And so it de-risks new entrants coming into the marketplace. It's also going to hopefully clean up a lot of the problems in publishing data. And I think that the biggest challenge is going to be how can we get foreign publishers, smaller publishers to be able to participate in this, because there's literally billions of dollars that is not been able to be matched and settled. And that is the money that needs to go out to all of the smaller publishers and the international publishers. And this is a one-time opportunity to really build it right.
Okay, so we have the invention of the wheel, we have the Gutenberg and the book printing revolution, we have the industrial revolution, and now we're in the early stages of a digital revolution. And when I hear you talk, I'm thinking that it's still early on. There's so many problems to be solved. There's so many. I mean, even in 2006, the idea of having all of the world's music on your phone at the touch of a button was just quite far out. Even in 2006, and you said you downloaded Napster 19 years ago.
Yeah.
So we're just still really early, aren't we?
Yeah.
I think that that's extremely important to remember and to remind ourselves of continually. And some of the problems or some of the challenges that we have come from the fact that things have happened really fast. So you just had to do things. And I think in particular when it comes to Spotify and some of the Spotify Plus data in many ways was simply that there was an innovation coming up. There was an opportunity for a lot of, for business being made. Only like a handful of years ago, we used to host, or we still host, a music conference in Kristiansand at the University of Agder, where Vickie has been taking part for many times, where music industry executives meet and discuss and internationally and try to figure out how to change the music industry. And I've been part of this discussion. We've also recorded those sessions, which I've based my entire doctorate dissertation on. The funny thing is that if you read through the transcriptions, and you only have to go back, let's say 7 years ago, the discussions at that time was that the only viable options on the table were a levy-based, a bundled-based, or an ad-based. There was no one anticipated this. No one could anticipate a streaming model that would actually pay a substantial amount of money coming into. So, and this was just a few years ago. And they had to license it. They had to, the recording music industry had to agree to it. And at that time,
because of Pirate Bay and etc.
Yeah, I think the legacy that they kind of killed off a potential digital that was luring in the back that we can't kill it off because it has a potential. So initially. The rights owner said, yes, we'll allow you to keep on, and we'll have to figure it out at some point. And so the infrastructure and the business deals weren't really put together. And so I think that is what needs to be discussed.
Well, and I also think that I don't think that Spotify would have had the same effect on the global market if it had started in the US. Because the terms and the way that the labels think and the control in the market, the size of the market, the risk was too high. And so Spotify, starting in Sweden and then really tackling the European market, I think was incredibly smart. And I think that it was the catalyst to really getting people to see that the user experience around streaming was really better. And once you start changing laptops every year and changing smartphones, and then you had to port your collection from one device to another over and over and over, it just becomes a hassle. And so the concept of things being in the cloud and everything being stream-based, it took a lot of different pieces besides just the rights and licensing to be able to have that experience come together. It took smartphones and operating systems and people really seeing the value of having this elegant user experience.
There's a lot of talk at Larm this year of big data getting bigger, metadata. The algorithms are more precise than ever. It's going to become even more precise in the future. And what are your thoughts on these things when it comes to streaming? Generative, personalized playlists that are unique only for you. And all the opportunities and maybe also dangers. I mean, how is this going to change the psychology of the songwriter? And maybe listeners become too sedated. We don't have a random button. We don't get to discover new music. All of this.
Yeah. Well, I think that one of the biggest issues for me with the playlists is that I do discover a lot of great music, but I have Sonos and Bose connected speakers, so I have music running through my house. And unless I'm looking at my phone, I have no idea what's playing. So I hear an artist, and I don't really have an easy mechanism to know who that artist is. How can I discover more of their music? Where are they going to reappear in one of my playlists? And so I think that, music to me is almost these, constant playlists have almost become like music is like wallpaper.
Yeah, because this sounds like the opposite of subcultural passion.
Right.
Where like, I have this 7-inch. I fought for this 7-inch. I waited 4 months for it to come in the mail. All of this stuff. This is like, God, this is more like a constant stream of wallpaper, as you say.
Exactly, and what you just described, that's how people are about games now. In the gaming world, and there's an excitement about it, and there's something that has gone away with having access to everything all the time. That we just don't feel like there's any urgency to get excited. It's like, okay, we're so focused on delivering this convenient service to consumers that we just spoon feed everyone. And I think there is something about human nature and discovering things that you really love and then being able to have an outlet to explore that further that we've kind of lost, even though we have access to everything.
Does that make you sad?
Well, it does make me
envious of the gaming world?
Yeah.
Or are you being pessimistic now? The Norwegian brought you into pessimism.
Exactly. My darkness is coming out. No, I do feel like something is missing. And it could be my age. And it could be that I grew up in an era and I knew what it was like to wait for that CD to come out and to wait to hear a song on the radio. And I think there's another generation that just has never had that context. But I do feel like just building familiarity and loyalty to artists is something that I'm just not getting through any streaming services right now.
I think there's an interesting thing that I want to test out. I had a talk earlier today over lunch with some friends and colleagues about the metadata or names, naming. This is power in many ways. So who controls what something is called? So if your music being played is just a stream of something coming at you under the label Friday or workouts or some type of mood or some type of weekday, which is very often the thing with the curated stuff from Spotify. It does something. It takes away the name. So
it depersonalizes.
It depersonalizes, and it very much ties with power and the concept of power. So I would, if I take away your name and I just give you a number, that it does something to you. And I think this is something that I find extremely interesting, is that the power relation of who controls what my fans consider me as. Do my fans consider me as Daniel, the blues singer, or do they consider me Friday workout? Or I think that's a interesting analogy that you need to, who owns. And I think as long as the metadata and the control of the naming and the genres and the band is not being controlled by the artists, the managements, the labels, it's going to be messed up.
Well, and now with voice and voice-activated speakers, that's a whole nother level, because people are just saying, well, Alexa, play me, 80s, blues, 90s, rock. And so who's making those decisions? Who's deciding, and under what conditions are they deciding what music gets surfaced? And so I feel like the user, at least in a world where they're putting in a search and they're putting in a name or starting with an artist, there is some intention there on the user's side. And in a voice world, I feel like we're really at risk of that. And who's determining what we hear?
Yeah. I just have to say, I'm not buying into the innovation thing with the smart speaker things. I don't really get it. Why that would represent a true innovation in many ways, and I also find it kind of strange in a time when all my friends have this small tape thing before their camera on their laptop.
Right.
Because they don't want to be filmed but they have smart speakers at home. It doesn't make any sense.
That are listening to everything. That are listening. I know. I am.
Are they listening? You don't activate them? They listen all the time?
Well, there are many instances where words can be a wake up word, and there are the way that the technology works is that it is always listening, because it's waiting to hear you say that word. Now, I'm not a super paranoid or person or conspiracy theorist, but I don't particularly like the idea of having a device in my home that is listening. And I also just feel like, do I want to be talking to my devices? It's just, to me, it is just not something that excites me. And I think people who have kids, I see the kids, that's a novelty, and kids really love shouting at the device and hearing a song come out. But I feel like it's a little bit of a fad that we just don't know how far it's going to go, and what the mechanisms are to control it.
Your attitude right now, the what you said, that represents to me kind of a new kind of awareness, a new kind of skepticism that we saw also in the opening talk here at Larm, where there was talk about the Cambridge Analytica scandal and the whole misuse of big data. And there was one person telling me that, I got this advice: don't buy into anything that has smart in it, because that means you got to trade in all your personal data. But I was thinking about how Spotify has opened up with Spotify artists. There's more control now for the artists to shape their look on Spotify and to communicate with their listeners or potential listeners at Spotify. What do you think? How do you think this will develop? This
You have to say that again.
The control the artists have of their own image and agency in streaming.
I think that's key. I think it's extremely important. I think it's key for for music to take ownership on whatever the fan is maneuvering through. I used to be a heavy buyer of music. I have a record collection and a CD collection I'm really proud of, and I used to spend all my money on recording music growing up. And I used to buy blindly anything that came out from certain labels, and of course all the bands that I was following. I would buy them blindly. And the problem now is, who do I follow? Like, who do I trust with the tastes and my attention and so forth today? So
your 6 seconds of attention.
Yeah,
which is the average human attention.
And I've kind of just given away to Discover Weekly and Release Friday. That's the guidance that these are the two things that I give my trust in, which is...
Yeah, and I also think, for the first, probably from 2000 to 2008, all of these industry events, all we did was debate whether or not consumers would ever pay for music, whether there was any value in recorded music, whether or not there would ever be anything beyond P2P and free advertising supported music. And I've always felt really positive that people would pay. And the reason is because as long as artists are creating great music and consumers still love it and still listen to it, that's the connection that this whole industry is built on. Everyone else is middlemen. And so, and that's the whole industry that's around it. And the connection between the artist and the fan is golden. And that is what everyone has to try to foster. So I'm glad that Spotify is really seeing themselves as a marketplace that's connecting fans and artists.
As a researcher, are you in direct contact with Spotify? Are they like really sharing and caring about your work, or are they like a Kafkaesque silent?
I've had one meeting. I've had one meeting with Spotify in Stockholm headquarters, which was really good, really really nice and friendly. I never got to see anything of value, but it was a really good meeting. The interesting thing is, I did a piece of research a couple of years ago together with MFO, or now Creo, the Musicians Union, and we did together with Erika Bertelsen, and we did meetings with all the major labels. We talked with Phonophile at that time, and we talked with Tidal and Spotify. The interesting thing from that experience was that I had no problem at all talking with the three majors, with Phonophile and and two of the majors. I'm not going to say who, but two of the majors were also extremely open about it. We could sit down. We had someone who would help me write stuff, and then we also had a legal person joining us. And we were able to sit down and just go through their numbers and everything. The two companies that were the most difficult was, of course, Spotify was very friendly, but they were difficult. We didn't get anything of value from them. But the one that was the most difficult was Tidal. So with Tidal, I wasn't allowed to bring anything that could record. I couldn't even take notes. So I wasn't allowed to take notes, and I had to come alone. I couldn't bring the legal experts, and I couldn't bring the one person who would help me taking notes. Of course, after I also understood that was at the time when they were doing a deal with JC. So obviously they were paranoid, and now we also know part of the reasons for it. But I found it extremely ironic that the companies that were the most open were the major labels with regards to this.
But I would also counter that when you are a DSP and you license from the labels and the publishers, you end up sending about 70+% of your money back out to them. The only thing you really have left that has any leverage is data. Yep. You have customers, but you have data about those customers. You have insights, you have knowledge about it. And so it doesn't surprise me that they wouldn't be terribly open about it, because that's all they have left.
Sure. But then again, we weren't looking into the data, we were looking into their business, the split of everything. So, yeah.
But that kind of data, what kind of value has that? Like, can you just briefly explain what kind of value has that data that the streaming services has? Like, how can they profit on that other than having it?
Well, having intelligence around what's working and what isn't working and who's listening to what and where. In another lifetime, I worked in radio, and it was really scientific. We knew how many people were listening every quarter hour. We knew what the total listening was. We knew how many times we had to play a song in order to break an artist. It was a formula, and every station kind of had this proprietary mix that worked. And so I think that with all of the DSPs, the information that they have is, the song gets released, it goes out into the wild. What happens? Why do some songs break out and others don't on a single playlist? Where are an artist's fans all over the world, and how are they engaging? How frequently are they engaging? What other artists are like them and have similar patterns? These are all really big data analytics tools that the services can use to better mine, potential customers, and artists and labels want that.
What are your thoughts, looking at it from an American perspective, on the Tidal scandal?
Well, I don't think that if that's another thing, if that had broken in the U.S., I just don't think that it would have ever kind of been cracked open. And I think it took the diligence of the reporters here. I mean, I don't really have a huge opinion about it. It looks to me, when I look at the data, I can't quite square anything about it. To me, I looked at it and I thought, well, it looks like, you could have used an excuse that it was stress testing on your platform or something, because it isn't typical user behavior. But I, caveat all of that by saying, I really want Tidal to succeed. I want SoundCloud to succeed. I want Spotify to succeed, all these standalone services, because I think that it's not healthy for the industry to only have the biggest, most well-capitalized technology companies in the world being the ones that offer music. I think we have to have some standalone services that really are committed to music. And so I want Tidal to succeed.
MySpace was a huge deal back in 2006. Downloads used to be a big deal. They're both dead. Is Spotify, what are your thoughts on Spotify having its power even more concentrated, taking more market shares? Is this the case, or are we going to can Spotify die in 10 years?
Well, I think Spotify is small compared to Google and Apple and Amazon and Facebook. I mean, there's no comparison in terms of the market capitalization and the power in the market. But I do believe that there is, room for innovation around business models. There's room for innovation in service types. But a few years ago, there used to be a lot of smaller services that were out in the market, and the major labels really didn't want it. They wanted a handful of companies that could pay them a lot of money and that they could consolidate the services and the access to music with a few companies, and that's what they got. And it's concentrated.
I think you have to see Spotify in context with its competitors, and you have to ask, which of them would I want to succeed? And if you compare them, you have to realize that these are very different business models. So Spotify is a typical startup company, and they're a startup company with a lot at risk and trying to set up something selling or distributing music and music consumption. Apple is totally different, and Apple Music is built around selling hardware, gadgets. It's originally, the iTunes model was built to sell iPods. It was a loss leader for something else that had a higher value. And I remember a couple of years ago, before Spotify came along, there was a huge concern on whether or not the music business was building itself upon something that was dependent on someone selling a gadget, right? Mm-hmm. And you have YouTube selling ads, and you have different motivations and different things that are at the core of their business model. And I think comparing those, I think Spotify is probably the better of all of them when it comes to being a successful thing that we should hope for in the future, or Deezer, or, so you have to compare them. But then again, I think we also have to be realistic, and especially if we look back in time, and at least open that sometime in near future we might have something entirely different that we haven't even thought of. We don't
Exactly.
have to. Yeah,
like the merging of everything. Like why don't we have like Netflix and Spotify and every film in the history of the world on the same fucking app?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or the device.
Yeah.
Yeah, we haven't really thought and contemplated about a post-streaming world or a post-subscription world. What does that look like? And partially because when you were in the past 5 or so years, if you were a licensee, you really didn't have that many choices. If you wanted to put music in the marketplace, you had only a few models that you could really adopt that would be well received on the other side of the negotiating table. But absolutely, I feel like, for me, I love that Spotify did the Gimlet, the podcast acquisition, because I think that music is missing context. It is missing the bits that you kind of want to know. Who is the artist? What are the stories behind them? What is the personalized radio stream that you can create for yourself in a digital world? And I think podcasts serve that. And right now most podcasts strip music out because the licensing is a mess. But in a world, both Pandora and Spotify are investing in this space. And so it's an audio world, it's storytelling, and it's using music as a mechanism to be able to engage with consumers as well as the spoken word.
Yeah.
But why can't we just fix the obvious problems, like the user-centric, the if you have one long song, you get paid the same as just a little song. If you have like a, say, 20-minute ambitious piece of orchestrated music, maybe you should get more paid for it. Why can't we have a better credit to the songwriter, more credits for the music, like all this? Why can't we just fix it? We got all the data. Is it that hard, or do we have interests that are pushing against it?
No,
Capitalist interest. There's a capitalism behind the developments.
Well, there is, and I think there's also a reluctance to open up everything to everyone, and so what I'm seeing is there are lots of smaller companies that are chipping away at all of these things. There's a company called Jaxta in Australia that's really focused on attribution. They're not focusing on rights, but it's the producers, the writers being able to search and browse, and it's kind of the IMDb for music. There's a handful of companies that are really established, Gracenote and Rovi, that also deal with this. There are people that are thinking about user-centric and maybe carving out part of the catalog and testing user-centric. So it's happening, but I think that the monumental task of having a business model where you're paying 75% out the door immediately, and you're getting music in from all over the world, and you have to optimize that. Just getting that to work and getting people to pay for it is a lot. So where are we going to start solving these problems? I think there's a really robust startup economy around this, and I think that some of the services themselves are working on it for their own business.
I think it's going to take a little time, and I think we expect things to happen too quick. So I think a lot of it is, it's not more than 3-4 years ago that the economic downfall started to change. I was at a conference in New York a couple of years ago, the New Music seminar. And that was just, I think, 4 years ago. And the thing that everyone were talking about is flat is the new up. Let's not concentrate on growth. Let's just stop the spiraling down. So flat is the new up. Let's just concentrate on flattening. And so I think we have to understand or agree that things are happening fast, and it's only the last couple of years that Spotify and on-demand streaming has proved to be a future default model, so to speak.
Exactly. I don't think it was until 2015 that all the traditional stakeholders and rights holders truly believed that streaming was here to stay. And the reason that shifted was because money started coming out of the back end of rights settlement on YouTube and Spotify, and then Apple Music got into the space. And so once it had gone beyond just paying your minimum revenue guarantees and your advances against your licenses, and that consumers were really adopting and paying for services, did everyone on the rights ownership side buy into it? And many of us have been in that church for a long time, but they weren't. But by the time that they realized that this was happening, it was also simultaneous that they were getting terabytes of data back from the label or back from the DSPs that they couldn't manage. So it's from just a technological standpoint, it's really hard to rebuild systems that are under stress and under use all the time. And there's a lot of shoring up of systems and data management all over the world, but it started pretty late. It started in 2015, 2016.
Isn't that mind-blowing how early in the stage of digital paradigm shift we really are? We're in the dinosaur stage, right?
Yeah, I don't think we have any idea how big it's going to be, and I feel like we're starting to see the power of it in the Western markets, but we haven't. Africa hasn't kicked off yet, and India's getting going, but there's just a lot of different territories around the world that have so much potential, and a lot of potential for local repertoire as well as international.
What are your thoughts on the new EU law, European Union law proposal regarding YouTube and Facebook having to pay up for content? Do you have any thoughts or?
I just read today, actually, this morning, an article on the fact that the end result of that article is becoming so different from the initial that even the labels and the rights owners are starting to object to it. So, and I think that it was also coming partly as a result of pretty heavy lobbying from YouTube, a second round of heavy lobbying, which seemed to have worked. So, I mean, I think I find the Article 13 really interesting because I think a lot of the people, a lot of music industry rights owners and label people tend to think that it's because EU politicians have shifted and now favors music rights owners. I don't think that's the case at all. I think the case is that they've shifted their attitude towards Google and Facebook. That is the core thing. That Google used to be a positive thing, and Facebook used to be, and now it's become. It's been over a year or so much heavier scrutiny over the fact that they don't pay taxes anywhere. They've become very influential in presidential elections, or all of these things, which has, I think, forced European policymakers to take action. And part of that action is to use copyrights and so forth. And it fits very well with music rights owners.
Exactly. And I also think that I would like to see rights holders jump and go with the flow of monetizing everything instead of doing takedowns. The number of takedowns that happen in YouTube are just astronomical. And, there's a lot of discussion about the value gap. Yes, I think Google has, an incredible market cap and market value, and so does Apple. But if you really want to just monetize your music as much as possible, don't take it down. Put it through YouTube and let it just, keep accruing money. And that is something where I feel like there's this reluctance to fully onboard all the music in there without doing takedowns, and instead try to change the technology and change it through legislation. I do feel like I'm rooting for the European Union to hold some of these big technology companies accountable, because I don't think they'll get the same kind of accountability in the U.S. because of our infatuation with capitalism. Yeah. But I do feel like they've gotten to be so powerful and so pervasive that we have absolutely no idea how much they know about everything that we do.
Yeah.
I mean, I was, this is kind of a sad story, but my dad was really sick and he ended up dying and he had stage 4 cancer. I was doing Google searches on stage 4 cancer, reading all about it. And I immediately started getting emails to the email account that was associated with my Facebook account for life insurance. Are you prepared? Do you need life insurance? And so, it was a Chrome browser where I was searching and reading medical websites there's a triangulation of data that went to someone who was gathering that up that was associated with my Facebook account. And then I got emails soliciting life insurance. So I feel like, okay, that's pretty ugly. I think that needs some attention. That felt like a huge privacy violation to me.
Are you hopeful for the future when it comes to the data security and personal security and everything?
Well, I think the first step is to understand what's really going on. And I think we're getting there. I think we're just starting to see the tip of the iceberg. I don't know that many people, at least, in Capitol Hill in the US, I think there's a lot of people who don't understand anything about technology. So I think it's really difficult to legislate in ways that are informed. But I think that there are companies that are starting up that are creating different mechanisms where instead of users always signing up and opting into everyone's terms of service, that there's a way to retain your own data, retain control over it, and opt other services into that. And I think that those kinds of things are getting some momentum, and it can't go on. We can't continue to have this happening.
It was so funny with the Mark Zuckerberg hearing.
I was like, they were like fanboys. They were total fanboys.
We have to kind of wrap it up, but I want to ask you, Vickie, looking at it from your perspective, in LA, you've been working with Sync forever. What's the most exciting things for you with technology and music consumption and everything music in the upcoming, let's say, 1 or 2 years?
Well, I am just seeing so much enthusiasm around music, everything from the finance and investment side, where there's lots of new money that's coming into the system. I'm working with a finance company that is providing solutions so that independent artists and labels and companies that are making acquisitions don't have to necessarily take money from a major label or from, Live Nation, that they can maintain independence. I think the WIN report that came out showing 39% market share for the indie sector, I think that's really strong. And I also see the shoring up of systems around the world, which I just can't emphasize enough, that we just don't have a machine-to-machine readable world in music yet. And so a lot of money that is being paid from consumers into the services is getting hung up in the system. And I don't even think now, people used to think it was always nefarious practices and, nobody wanted to pay that money out. I actually don't think that's true. I think now it's just about having systems that are modern enough to cope with the data. And some of it, I think, is beyond human capability. And we have to look at things like machine learning and AI to be able to manage all of this. And if songwriters want to have 20 songwriters in the studio and they want to figure out their splits after the song is released, we need to figure out a mechanism to be able to
fire up
to cope with that.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
What about you, Daniel?
What?
In terms of being excited for something when it comes to digital music consumption and everything music and technology.
Well, I was just thinking about, and that got me kind of excited with the smart speakers, because I sound a little bit skeptic and a little pessimistic and negative, and I just want to. What if the future holds? I think if we tie these smart speakers with good metadata and smart people, if we have smart people, smart speakers, and good metadata, we might get somewhere. So if you can tie in the music with data points that really matters, like the labels, the studios, the technicians, the musicians, all of these things, then you can ask correct questions. I was thinking after you mentioned the smart speakers, the first thing that I was thinking about. Well, then you need a smart question, don't you? So you need to ask something smart. And I'm thinking in the future with smart speakers, perhaps we could have a two-way dialogue, so that you could say, "Play me something like from the '80s," and you would get a reply, "That's a stupid question." And then, all right. You need to tie it down. Play me something from this label or something.
Birmingham, 1982,
Yes.
Anarcho leanings.
Yes, and the smart speaker comes back. That's an excellent question. Here you go. And that's what the future is going to hold.
Yeah. Let's end this talk with, there's all this talk about, we're talking about everything digital, everything in the streaming services, blah, blah, blah. But there's a life for music outside digital. There's a life, there's a reason why we're sitting here IRL. I can touch you, Barely. Oh yeah, I can. What are your thoughts on music outside of the whole digital paradigm? For the artist, for the listener.
Oh, I don't think there is anything that compares to live. I just really don't think there is. I think it's emotional. I think that it's immersive. And I think that now we're starting to see all these other immersive experiences be developed where artists are using visuals and VR and expansive experiences that when we sit at home on our phones and in our little with our VR headsets in our sad little worlds, that we still want human connection. And so music is the best way to meet that need, and I see artists embracing that and going out and creating all sorts of new dome-based installations and live experiences.
I agree with the live part, definitely. To see concerts, it's one of the better ways to experience music. But I think for the human part, I think the future is going to hold curation, human curation. I think that is what we're going to see. I think in the future, I would rather have you, Torgny, putting up a playlist of hardcore music than to have a algorithm think that it, because you would, set up a list that would, have stuff in it that I wouldn't be aware of, to surprise me, to test me. And I think this is what we'll hopefully see from the streaming services is to invest in human capital, in setting up these playlists and these curated experiences, not just algorithms and robots. And I think that's where we're heading.
Yeah, I think the best is the blend of the two, because with 30 million songs and 25,000 songs being uploaded into services every day, that's pretty challenging from a human standpoint. But I think there are all sorts of technologies that we can use to augment that.
Yeah.
Vickie Nauman and Nordgård, everyone, thank you for coming.